Hello. So I'm up on Mount Royal again to look at. Today I want to talk about the advent of algorithms. I know you've heard about this. We talked about it with regards to Yuval Noah Harari. He's been beating the drum about this for a long time in Homo Deus, and then more recently in 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. I want to go into that a little more, just to what kind of challenges this might pose for human happiness, and also what kind of potential advantages it might actually have for human happiness. So first of all, just on a very basic level, so people understand what's at stake here, imagine that we are going into an ice cream place. We're going into Ripples or Ben and Jerry's or something like that, right? And they've got lots and lots of flavors to choose from, and they've got frozen yogurt, all that stuff, right? Now, if somebody asks you before we walk in, right, what is John going to? What flavor do you think he's going to get, right? And let's say you're like, it's my wife that they're asking, right? And so she's known me for 20 years, over 20 years now. So she's gonna be very likely to guess what flavor I'm gonna order, right? And the reason why she's gonna be good at guessing, all right, is because she has got ice cream with me like probably thousands of times in the last 20 years. So she's seen my decisions many times, and she has a pretty good guess of what my preferences are, right? So she'll have a pretty good guess, right? Now, if you ask me before I go into that place, right, what flavor am I likely to get, I will also tell you what flavor I'm likely to get, right? Now, you would think that probably my guess would be better than my wife's, but not necessarily. I might not know my preferences as well as she does, but I could even get it wrong, right? Because I could go into the place and I could see a flavor that I have never seen before or have never noticed before, and I could be like, wow, I want to try that. And then I'll get that, in which case my prediction about what I was going to get would be completely wrong, right? Now, this is a very, very simple example, but there have been these really, really fascinating surveys, right, where they will get like 100 questions. This is the usual one that I've seen, right? They get 100 questions, and they'll ask you, and there'll be everything from really banal questions like what's your favorite color to what's your favorite flavor of ice cream, to more complicated ones like I don't know, what kind of political ideology do you find most convincing? What do you think about life after death? What do you think about all sorts of questions, right? And what they do is they get let's say we were doing the experiment on you, right? So they would have you fill out that questionnaire, and they'd see what your answers are, right? And be totally anonymous. Then they would go to people that know you, right? People who, and they'd sort of go from people that know you from a distance, right? You're not really close with them, but they know you. So let's say they might talk to somebody that you've been working with for a few years. So this person's been working with you. They know you, but you've never hung out with them socially, and you're not. I don't think you probably wouldn't call them your friend, but you know them. You know them. You see them work all the time, right? And then they give that person the questions, and they say, "How do you think?" How do you think you are going to answer those questions, right? So they have to, this like hypothetical coworker of yours needs to say how you would respond to these 100 questions, right? Now, as you might expect, usually when you're dealing with somebody who doesn't know you that well, they get a lot of stuff wrong because they don't know you that well, right? So they, generally speaking, when I remember reading one of these studies, they found that people who have worked with you for years but have never hung out with you socially, and they're not really kind of good friends with you, they still do pretty well. I mean, they do better than a complete stranger, obviously, but they usually will get somewhere about like 40 or 50 questions right, and then they'll get right about 50 to 60 questions wrong in the range, right? So they're not clueless when it comes to you, but there's a lot of things they don't know about you, right? Now, then we go to somebody who's closer to you, but not really close to you. So this could be a cousin that you've known your whole life, who knows a lot about you and has seen you through many different stages in your life, and they know you, but you've never been really tight. You've never been really, really close, right? So they might ask somebody like that, right? And what you find, once again, they do better, right? They usually will get, they'll get like somewhere in the 50s or the low 60s of the questions correctly, right? They know your preferences pretty well, right? Then you go to somebody who is like a sibling or a really good friend, right? And once again, you bump up, right? And you get into the 70s, right? You might even get into the low 80s, right? Then when it comes to somebody who knows you extremely well, right? So your spouse of many, many years, or your girlfriend or boyfriend, if you've been together for a long time and you really know each other very well. Maybe like your best friend that you've been friends for decades. Maybe your mother, right? Mothers often know their kids extremely well, right? So if you ask somebody like that, somebody who's extremely close to you and knows you very, very, very well, they will generally get a score that is somewhere in the high 80s to low 90s, right? So they will get, the last study like this I read, they found that people really close to them were getting a score of on average, like about 92. So this is somebody who's extremely close to you, and yet they still get, right? They still get 5-10 questions wrong, something like that. They still get not a lot, but even somebody who's really close to you, there can be things that they don't know about you, right? So that's the score they get. Okay, now here's where this gets really, really creepy. And here's where I think that Yuval Noah Harari and Sam Harris and other people who have been sounding the alarm about how dangerous these new algorithms are. I think they are onto something. Right now, the Google algorithm, right, the Amazon algorithm, the Facebook algorithm, if you give that algorithm the same questions about you and say, how would she answer this? Right? How would he answer this? They tend to get, especially the Facebook algorithm and the Google algorithm, they tend to score around 95 to 90, like 95 or 96, right? They get 95 or 90 to about, on average, like somewhere in that range, right? Usually, they get that many of the questions correctly, right? Which means this algorithm, right? It's just a machine learning thing. It's just an AI. It actually, in some respects, seems to know you better than your mother knows you. Right? It seems to know you better than your husband knows you, your wife knows you, your best friend knows you. Right? That I find that very, very creepy. Right? Now, this is the reason why this is important is because these algorithms are being used to manipulate us. Right? They're being used to target market things to us. They're being used to convince us to vote for particular politicians or political parties, to buy certain products, right? So knowing what your preferences are better than anybody else it makes it possible for these. So to give you an example, this is an example that Yuval Noah Harari gives in 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. He talks about how he didn't come out, he didn't realize he was gay until he was 21 years old. But he said, these algorithms can probably already tell if you're gay long before you realize it, right? And they will only get better at this, right? When they can collect way more biofeedback, right? When they can actually check your whether your pupils are dilating when you look at particular YouTube videos with like hot guys or hot women, right? They might be able to tell by that. They'll be able to measure your blood pressure, stress hormones in your blood, your breathing rate, all these various things, the subtle changes in flushing in your face, right? So when they can do that, right, it means that let's say you have like a Coca-Cola, right? Increasingly, ads are targeted particularly to the people that they're pushed at, right? Rather than having like a common ad that everybody would see, which was what you would do in the 1950s, let's say, right? Now you have targeted ads that go directly at you, right? So if they're showing, Coke wants to show you an ad on YouTube, right? The algorithm could immediately calculate, knowing what it knows about you, whether you are more likely to be kind of sold on buying the product if you show an ad with a shirtless guy or with a shirtless woman, right? So this actually this information about you will be worth billions of dollars, right? And it will make it possible for advertisers, for political hacks, for PR agencies to manipulate us in ways that we can scarcely imagine, right? I mean, one thing that I was reading about, one example was, it said, let's say the algorithm figures out that you are really afraid of spiders. This is a random example. It could be many things, or you hate. This is a very random example, but you hate the color, I don't know, purple, right? Whatever. So they could, when they're making an ad to try and get you to vote for a particular candidate. So let's say it's the Democratic Party hires this company, right? They could show you a negative ad about Trump, and then in the background, they could just make the entire background of the ad. It could be like Trump standing there giving like a speech, and they would be having a voiceover saying, Trump sucks and all this stuff. And the whole background of the screen could be purple. And they could like automatically put like a spider in the background, which would be flashed so quickly that you wouldn't consciously know that you saw it, but you would have unconsciously saw it. Like in Fight Club when they like clip in those like porn clips into like family movies and stuff like that, right? So you could see this video and immediately have a flash of dislike for Trump, just because the background is purple and you don't like purple. And you wouldn't even realize that you had that flash of dislike, right? It would have happened subconsciously. And then you'll see the spider and kind of feel this recoil of disgust, and you won't even realize that you saw the spider, right? Because it was so subtle that you missed it, right? And presumably the Trump campaign could do exactly the same thing to the Biden campaign. They could show you images of Biden, and all the background would be purple, and there'd be like a spider flashing on the like some tarantula crawling over his shoulder, like really quickly, which would make you just like, you're like, I don't know, something about that Biden guy, man. I look at him and he just makes my skin crawl. I don't know, man. I'm not gonna fucking vote for him, right? So this is just like a random example, but there's a lot of ways in which these algorithms could be used to manipulate us, to undermine our freedoms, right? I mean, our whole system of our culture is to a large extent based on classical liberal assumptions, right? Our economic system is largely based on the idea that the customer is always right, which means that believe that people should be entrusted to make decisions about what they want to do with their money to the most part, and we shouldn't kind of tell them what to do. Right? Our system, when it comes to love, is very much predicated on, people should be allowed to love what they want to love. Follow your heart, to thine own self be true. All that stuff, right? It's all predicated on individual choice, right? And our democracy is based on the idea that that on the whole, the best way to make political decisions is to have citizens make individual choices. Right. Now, we obviously we understand that some people make bad choices, and we understand that not everybody has all the information that perhaps they need. Yeah, we know all of that, but still, we think that on balance, it's better to have a whole bunch of people sort of making this decision with everybody acting in a free way. Right. Well, these algorithms in the future may make it possible for whoever has the money to pay for them, right? Whoever has the power to wield these powerful tools, they will be able to manipulate us in ways that are really terrifying, right? Now, if they can demonstrate that this can be done, then that's going to seriously erode confidence in democracy, and and the thing is, we don't really have at the moment. We don't really have something else waiting in the wings. Like, we don't have a better option waiting, right? So we should think this through a great deal and figure out, how we're going to tackle it, right? Likewise, if it turns out that consumers can be manipulated in ways that we never imagined, well, that's going to mean that we're going to have to rethink consumer protection laws. We're going to have like way more stringent consumer protection laws. We're not going to be able to just say, well, you're the dumbass who bought it, too bad, right? Like, if we can show that it's actually very easy to manipulate people into making horrible decisions with their money, then we'll probably have to change that as well, right? Okay, now one sort of bright spot, or potentially bright spot, also creepy, but potentially bright spot of these technologies is that we could increasingly have a therapist in our phone, right? And this is already being developed, right? So what this would mean is you could have a kind of a counselor, right? A therapist in your phone, which would be strapped up to would be connected to all sorts of biometric data, everything from measuring your blood pressure, your heart rate, your breathing, stress hormones, and this is already, if you look on your iPhone, right, the little heart app, right, that's measuring how many steps you take every day, like when you sleep. You can get more complicated ones, the Fitbits and things like that, which will record all sorts of biometric data from you, right? Well, if this was strapped up to a kind of a therapist that was monitoring you all the time, right? This therapist could actually potentially give you really good advice, right? Because one of the problems that has always bedeviled therapy is that you go into the therapist, and the therapist there's all these limiting factors of how good the advice that a therapist gives you is going to be, because, well, the therapist could be just stupid, like not that insightful, not that smart. That's an obvious problem, right? But the therapist could also be, not interested in you particularly. There's also the problem that the therapist really, all he or she knows is what you've told them, right? So they've heard this incredibly one-sided view of things, which could be wildly inaccurate, right? And then there's an even bigger problem, which is that the therapist, even if you are being as truthful as possible, right, you may not actually understand what's going on with you or why you're doing things very well, right? So even if you're being really truthful, you may be wrong anyway, right? So these sort of therapy apps that you could download from the App Store would have far less of these limitations, right? Because these therapy apps could actually, they could have all this biometric data as well, right? They could tell if you were lying, right? They could tell your by your facial expressions, your blood pressure, all sorts of things. And also, they might be able to give you some very practical advice. Like if you're feeling really anxious and depressed today, they could say, well, I see that you only slept 3 hours last night. Maybe don't stress about this too much. You're just tired. Or, oh, I see that you are, your white cell blood count is going really high right now. I think you're probably just coming down with the cold. Don't stress about this too much. Or you could ask about much more momentous questions like, I'm I'm in love with these two different guys. My ex-boyfriend, he wants to get back together, but I'm also in love with this guy that I've been seeing for the last 4 months or something like that. And which one of them should I choose, right? Well, the therapy app could potentially, this algorithm that knows you better than anybody else, probably in many ways knows you better than you know yourself. This app could actually give you some really, really good advice, right? About which person to choose, right? It could give you really good advice about what careers to choose, right? What cities, if you're deciding what cities you should move to, right? An algorithm that knows you extremely, extremely well could provide you with a kind of self-knowledge that even your best friend can't provide to you, or even the most insightful therapists can't provide to you. That could be very potentially useful. Now, of course, there'd be a downside to that, as Harari points out, because making important decisions is a skill, right? And like any skill, it degrades if you don't use it. Right? Use it or lose it. I mean, I've seen people, I've never had a good sense of direction for this, so this is not a thing for me, but I've seen people who had fantastic sense of direction. It was legendary. They could just orient themselves in a new city really, really quickly. It's quite remarkable. And because of Google Maps, they fucking suck. They have no sense of direction now, right? Because you rely on your phone, you rely on the machine to have a sense of direction for you, and pretty soon you've lost the ability to orient yourself, right? I mean, I know, back in the day when I was a teenager, this is before there were digital phones and, long before cell phones. We just had these rotary phones, and I remember I had probably 50 phone numbers memorized in my head. I mean, all my friends, my family members, I had all these numbers memorized in my head, right? Now, I couldn't even tell you what my wife's phone number is. I don't even know what my son's phone numbers are, right? Because my phone remembers all that stuff. I don't even know what my own phone. Okay, I know what my own phone number is, but that's about it, right? Because I've learned. But what's funny is that my Aunt Gail has the same phone number that she had decades ago, before we got digital phones that display what the phone number is, and before we had cell phones. And I still remember her phone number. I can tell. Well, I'm not gonna say it now on the video, but I know. Mom, if you're watching, you know what I'm talking about. Last one, 2910. Last four numbers. Anyway, I remember that phone number because that was there before I had this machine that could actually remember things for me, right? But all the phone numbers since then, I rely on the machine. So we're already basically becoming kind of cyborgs that are, right, having half of our consciousnesses and our memory is in Wikipedia and Google and all that stuff. But anyway, that's enough doom and gloom for today. Take care. See you tomorrow.